If your grass won't stay green naturally, we'll help it. That was the first thing Brenda Whitmore said as she dragged a spray nozzle across my front lawn at 5:47 on a Thursday morning while half the neighborhood watched from their driveways holding coffee mugs. The sharp chemical smell of fertilizer and green dye hit me before I even stepped onto my porch. Bright emerald streaks soaked into the dry summer grass like somebody had spilled paint across my yard. Sprinklers hissed in the distance all through Willow Creek Estates, that constant suburban soundtrack of wasted water and fake perfection. Brenda stood there in spotless white tennis clothes beside her golf cart with one hand on her hip and the other gripping a pump sprayer like she was saving the neighborhood from disaster. Community standards matter, Ethan, she called out loud enough for everyone to hear. Her smile looked polished and cold, the kind real estate agents practice in mirrors. I could feel 30 pairs of eyes watching me from behind trimmed hedges and decorative mailboxes. Nobody said a word. Nobody ever did when Brenda started one of her public performances. I looked down at the grass under my boots, dry in some spots, green in others, perfectly healthy for a Texas summer running through its third drought restriction in 2 years. But healthy wasn't good enough for Brenda Whitmore. She wanted magazine cover green, artificial country club green, the kind of lawn that drinks 4,000 gallons of water a week just to impress people driving past at 20 miles per hour. You can't spray chemicals on my property, I said calmly. Brenda gave a tiny shrug like I was being unreasonable. Actually, the HOA maintenance clause allows corrective treatment for neglected landscaping. Corrective treatment. That's how she described trespassing with a tank full of green dye before sunrise. The mist drifted through the warm morning air and settled onto the cuffs of my work jeans. I could taste the bitterness of fertilizer at the back of my throat. 2 houses down, old Mr. Donnelly slowly backed into his garage and shut the door the second Brenda glanced his way. Smart man. Brenda loved making examples out of people. Last month, she fined a retired teacher $600 because her flower beds looked visually inconsistent with community aesthetics. Before that, she threatened legal action against a guy for parking his plumbing van in his own driveway overnight. Me? I'd become her favorite target the second I stopped wasting water to keep my lawn looking like a golf course. See, I design irrigation systems for a living. 20 years of drought management across Arizona, Nevada, and Texas taught me one thing real fast. Grass doesn't matter. Water does. But people like Brenda treat lawns like status symbols. The greener your yard, the more valuable your existence supposedly becomes. I watched her finish spraying the last strip near my sidewalk, while the early sunlight reflected off the wet green coating like fresh paint. Then she handed me a violation notice already folded in half. You have 7 days to restore acceptable lawn coloration or fines will continue daily. Her perfume mixed with the smell of chemicals and hot pavement as she leaned closer. Some of us work very hard to protect property values. Then she climbed into her golf cart and drove off slowly, making sure the neighbors got one final look at my bright green humiliation before she disappeared around the corner. What Brenda didn't know was that I'd already been documenting every single thing she'd done for the past 3 months. Every warning letter, every selective fine, every illegal water overuse report, every minute of security footage. And standing there in the middle of my soaked lawn while green dye dripped into the cracks of my driveway, I finally realized something important. Brenda didn't care about grass. She cared about control. The green dye dried into my lawn like a bad cover-up by noon. Under the Texas sun, the fake color looked almost fluorescent, too perfect compared to the rest of the neighborhood. Even from inside my kitchen, I could see where Brenda's spray pattern overlapped the natural grass like brush strokes on cheap drywall paint. The smell lingered all day. Chemical. Artificial. Sharp enough to sting the back of my nose every time the wind shifted. I stood at the sink watching sprinklers fire across Willow Creek Estates in synchronized waves while my coffee went cold beside me. Thousands of gallons spraying into the air during mandatory drought restrictions, all because people here treated grass like religion. My name is Ethan Walker, and if there is one thing 20 years in irrigation engineering teaches you, it is that water tells the truth faster than people do. Pipes leak. Pressure drops. Usage reports never lie. People lie constantly, especially in neighborhoods with homeowners associations. I grew up outside Flagstaff, Arizona, where summers smelled like hot dust and dry cedar instead of fertilizer and wet pavement. My father repaired farm pumps for a living, and by the time I was 14, I could rebuild a sprinkler manifold faster than most grown men. Back then, green grass actually meant something. It meant rain had come. It meant crops survived another month. You did not waste water just to impress strangers driving past your mailbox. But Willow Creek Estates operated on a completely different religion. Here, grass color was social currency. Lawns had to stay golf course green even when local reservoirs dropped to historic lows. Every morning before work, I watched automatic sprinkler systems hiss across perfectly trimmed yards while city officials begged residents to conserve water on the evening news. The irony would have been funny if it was not so pathetic. I moved into Willow Creek 2 years earlier after my divorce. Quiet neighborhood. Good garage space. Small backyard. I wanted simple. After spending 16 years building irrigation systems for commercial developments across 3 states, I was tired of noise, traffic, and pretending expensive neighborhoods made people decent. My little brick house sat near the end of a cul-de-sac lined with identical mailboxes and decorative oak trees that looked imported directly from a suburban starter pack catalog. At first, the neighborhood seemed peaceful. Then Brenda Whitmore noticed my lawn. Specifically, she noticed I let parts of it go naturally dormant during peak summer heat instead of drowning it in water 24 hours a day. Bermuda grass turns brown under drought stress. That is normal. Healthy roots survive underground while the surface conserves moisture. Anyone with basic landscaping knowledge understands that. Brenda did not care. To her, brown grass was moral failure. The first violation notice appeared 3 weeks after I moved in. Lawn discoloration negatively affecting neighborhood appearance. $50 fine. Then came another one about edging consistency. Another about patchy visual texture. I remember sitting at my kitchen table reading those letters while the air conditioner hummed overhead and wondering how adults with full-time jobs found enough free time to obsess over somebody else's grass color. But the deeper problem was not the fines. It was Brenda herself. She patrolled the neighborhood every morning in her white golf cart like some kind of suburban park ranger, stopping to photograph lawns, trash cans, fences, even flower beds. People lowered their voices when she passed by. Neighbors waved nervously instead of naturally. She had turned a homeowners association into a full-time surveillance operation. And standing there staring at my chemically dyed lawn that afternoon, I realized something else too. Brenda had not sprayed my grass because she cared about appearances. She sprayed it because she expected me to obey. 3 days after Brenda spray-painted my lawn, the violation notices started showing up twice a day. One taped to my mailbox in the morning. Another slipped under my front door by evening like some kind of suburban ransom note. The paper smelled faintly of printer toner and cheap perfume every single time, which told me Brenda was delivering some of them herself instead of using the management company. Lawn inconsistency. Failure to maintain visual standards. Improper drought appearance mitigation. I wish I was making that last one up. I sat at my kitchen counter flipping through the stack while the ceiling fan pushed warm air around the room and cicadas buzzed outside like electrical wires humming in the heat. 7 notices in 4 days. $400 in fines already. The craziest part was how selective the enforcement had become. Across the street, one yard had dead patches big enough to bury a pickup truck. Another house had weeds curling around the mailbox post like jungle vines. No warnings. No fines. No Brenda. But my lawn suddenly required military-level inspection reports because I refused to waste thousands of gallons of water every week pretending drought conditions did not exist. That Friday morning, I caught Brenda parked outside my house in her golf cart before sunrise. She sat there sipping iced coffee from a stainless steel tumbler while taking photos of my yard with an iPad. The glow from the screen reflected off her sunglasses even in the dark. When she noticed me standing in the driveway, she smiled without lowering the camera. "Just documenting ongoing violations," she said. The sound of sprinklers echoed up and down the street behind her while water ran down gutters into storm drains. Entire rivers disappearing so people could feel superior about grass. "You know the city is asking residents to reduce irrigation by 40%, I told her. Brenda gave a dismissive wave like conservation laws were beneath her. "That applies to ordinary homeowners, Ethan. Willow Creek has appearance obligations." Appearance obligations. I watched water spray across 3 different lawns behind her while heat shimmered off the pavement in ripples. The reservoirs outside Austin were at record lows, but apparently the HOA considered dead grass a greater emergency than actual drought conditions. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the neighborhood clubhouse to pay my monthly dues. The lobby smelled like lemon cleaner and stale air conditioning, the kind of artificial cold that never feels comfortable. Brenda stood behind the front desk talking to two residents about flower bed compliance. The second she saw me walk in, her entire posture changed. Her smile sharpened. "Good news," she announced loudly enough for the room to hear. "We are reviewing additional corrective actions for your property." One of the residents immediately looked away toward the coffee station like he wanted no part of the conversation. Smart move. Brenda thrived on public embarrassment. "Corrective actions?" I asked calmly. She folded her arms. "The board is discussing mandatory landscaping intervention if conditions do not improve." Mandatory intervention. She talked about my lawn like it was a contagious disease. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead while the air conditioner rattled through the vents. I remember hearing every tiny sound in that moment because I was trying very hard not to react emotionally. Brenda wanted anger. She wanted shouting. People like her always do because anger makes you sloppy. But irrigation work teaches patience. Water pressure builds slowly before pipes burst. "Interesting," I said instead. "Did the board also discuss why Willow Creek exceeded county water recommendations by 200,000 gallons last month?" Brenda blinked once. Tiny pause. Barely noticeable. But I saw it. Then her smile came back even tighter than before. "Be careful, Ethan," she said quietly. "People who create problems in this neighborhood usually regret it." The room suddenly felt colder. Not threatening exactly. Worse. Controlled. Practiced. Like she had said versions of that sentence many times before. I drove home with the smell of fresh-cut grass drifting through my truck vents and realized something important. This was not about lawn color anymore. Brenda Whitmore had turned my yard into a power contest. Unfortunately for her, she had picked a fight with a man whose entire career revolved around measuring systems, tracking pressure, and finding leaks. The knocking started at exactly 7:13 on Saturday morning. 3 sharp hits against my front door. Not neighbor knocking. Authority knocking. I opened the door to find 2 landscaping contractors wearing neon safety shirts standing beside Brenda Whitmore in my driveway. The morning heat already carried that dry, dusty smell Texas gets before noon, and somewhere nearby a leaf blower screamed across the neighborhood like an angry chainsaw. Brenda held a clipboard against her chest with both hands, perfectly manicured nails resting on top like she was posing for a campaign photo. "Good morning, Ethan," she said with that artificial sweetness that always sounded rehearsed. "The board approved emergency landscape correction services for your property." One of the contractors avoided eye contact immediately. The other looked down at his boots. Smart men. They already knew this felt wrong. I stepped onto the porch slowly, barefoot against the warm concrete. "You approved what?" Brenda flipped a page on her clipboard. "Your lawn continues to violate acceptable visual standards under subsection 12 of the Neighborhood Appearance Guidelines. The association has authorized remediation." Remediation. Another fake corporate word designed to make trespassing sound professional. Behind her sat a trailer loaded with pallets of sod rolls and fertilizer bags stacked waist-high. The smell of fresh-cut grass mixed with gasoline exhaust from the truck idling at the curb. "You are not replacing my lawn," I said. Brenda tilted her head slightly, pretending patience. "Then perhaps you should have complied voluntarily before values across the community suffered further decline." There it was again. Property values. People like Brenda always hide behind that phrase because it makes personal obsessions sound civic-minded. One of the contractors finally spoke up quietly. "Ma'am, we probably need written homeowner approval before we start removal." Brenda's smile vanished for half a second. Tiny crack in the mask. "The association has authority," she snapped. The contractor nodded immediately and backed off like he regretted opening his mouth. I could hear sprinklers clicking rhythmically down the block, while warm wind pushed dead leaves across the sidewalk. Then I noticed something interesting sitting underneath Brenda's clipboard. Water usage reports. Thick stack. Highlighted pages. She had been tracking irrigation records neighborhood-wide. Suddenly, every weird violation notice started making more sense. Brenda was not just monitoring lawns. She was monitoring consumption. "You have access to resident water records now?" I asked. Brenda shifted the clipboard tighter against her chest. The board reviews all necessary compliance information. Necessary compliance information. Another phrase that sounded legal until you thought about it for more than 3 seconds. Texas utility records are protected under privacy laws unless homeowners authorize disclosure, which meant either Brenda was bluffing or somebody at the HOA management office had crossed a line they should not have crossed. The metallic taste of adrenaline hit the back of my tongue right then because suddenly this was bigger than annoying lawn fines. Much bigger. Brenda must have noticed the look on my face because her confidence sharpened again. "You really should stop fighting this, Ethan," she said softly. "People here care about appearances. They do not want to live next to neglected property." Neglected property. My lawn had been professionally maintained the entire time, just not artificially overwatered. There is a difference. I looked past her toward the street, where several curtains moved behind windows. Neighbors watching quietly again. Always watching. Nobody wanted to become Brenda's next target. I finally smiled for the first time all week. Small smile. Calm smile. The kind that confuses controlling people because they expect anger instead. "I think we are done here," I told her. Brenda narrowed her eyes slightly. "Excuse me. You said the board approved remediation," I replied. "Perfect. That means there is paperwork. And if there is paperwork, there is liability." The air suddenly felt still. Even the leaf blower noise faded somewhere in the distance. Brenda stared at me for 2 long seconds before turning sharply toward the contractors. "We are leaving," she snapped. They loaded back into the truck without a single complaint. Tires crunched against dry gravel as they pulled away from the curb. Brenda lingered beside her golf cart just long enough to deliver one final warning. "You are making this harder than it needs to be." Then she drove off through the sunlight with her clipboard pressed tightly against her chest, like she was carrying state secrets. I stood there listening to the fading hum of her golf cart and realized something important. Brenda had started making mistakes. And people obsessed with control usually make the biggest mistakes right before everything collapses. By the second week of August, Brenda Whitmore had stopped pretending the fines were about landscaping. The notices became personal. Excessive driveway clutter because my toolbox sat beside the garage for 2 hours on a Saturday. Unauthorized outdoor storage because I left a coil of irrigation pipe near the side gate overnight. Visual inconsistency because one section of my lawn entered natural drought dormancy faster than the rest. Every violation arrived with another fee attached to it, like she was building a private tax system one envelope at a time. The stack on my kitchen counter grew thick enough to bend under its own weight. Paper curled at the edges from the humidity, while the smell of printer ink mixed with coffee and warm drywall inside the house. At first, I almost gave her what she wanted. That is the embarrassing part. I adjusted sprinkler schedules. I reseeded dry patches. I even hired a lawn crew one weekend just to eliminate excuses. Did not matter. Brenda always found something new. One Tuesday morning, she cited my grass height after a rainstorm even though the landscaping company had serviced the yard less than 18 hours earlier. Another time she photographed tire marks near my curb after a delivery truck stopped outside for 5 minutes. She was not inspecting property anymore. She was hunting for leverage. But somewhere in the middle of all that nonsense, something inside me shifted. I stopped reacting emotionally. Stopped arguing. Stopped trying to defend myself at HOA meetings while Brenda performed fake professionalism behind folding tables and bottled water trays. Instead, I started documenting everything. Engineers solve problems by tracking patterns. So I treated Brenda like a system failure. Every violation notice got scanned and time-stamped. Every conversation got recorded legally from my own property. I installed 2 additional security cameras under the garage eaves after noticing golf cart headlights slowing outside my house before sunrise. Tiny red recording lights blinked softly each night while cicadas screamed through the Texas heat outside. Then I started tracking water usage. That was where things got interesting. Really interesting. See, irrigation systems leave fingerprints if you know where to look. Pressure drops. Run times. Valve sequencing. Overspray patterns. Most people see sprinklers. I see data. One evening around midnight, I sat at my kitchen table with county drought restriction guidelines spread beside my laptop while warm air rattled softly through the vents overhead. Outside, automatic sprinklers kicked on across Willow Creek estates like synchronized artillery fire. Tick-tick hiss. Tick-tick hiss. Entire blocks watering simultaneously despite county conservation warnings limiting residential irrigation to twice per week. But Brenda's section of the neighborhood looked like Augusta National Golf Club in the middle of July. Deep emerald lawns, wet sidewalks, decorative fountains running 24 hours a day. It did not add up. So I checked public utility reports. Then landscaping invoices buried inside HOA financial disclosures. Then county conservation records. By 2 in the morning, I finally leaned back in my chair and laughed quietly to myself because the whole thing suddenly made perfect sense. Brenda was not just violating drought recommendations. Willow Creek Estates was consuming nearly double the permitted neighborhood water allocation every single month. Hundreds of thousands of excess gallons. And somehow the HOA board never received penalties, which meant somebody was either hiding reports or pulling favors at the county level. The next morning, I watched Brenda cruise past my house again in her white golf cart, while sprinklers sprayed behind her like stage effects in a Vegas show. She slowed down just enough to stare at my lawn before driving onward. Same smug expression, same polished control. But this time, I noticed something she did not. The irrigation runoff from the common areas flowed straight down the curb beside my driveway, carrying bright green fertilizer foam into the storm drains. Evidence. Physical evidence. The kind that photographs beautifully. I stood there in the humid morning heat, smelling wet grass and chemical runoff, while sunlight reflected off the water moving past my boots. Then I finally understood the mistake Brenda Whitmore had made. She thought angry men lose control. She did not realize quiet men start building cases. The idea came to me at 2:18 in the morning while I was standing barefoot in my backyard listening to sprinklers waste water across Willow Creek Estates. Tick, hiss, tick, hiss. The sound rolled through the neighborhood like a metronome for suburban insanity. Warm air carried the smell of wet soil, chlorine, and fresh fertilizer over the fences while runoff trickled down gutters toward storm drains already stained green from chemical treatments. Every house around me glowed faintly under landscape lighting like some kind of artificial country club dropped in the middle of a drought zone. And suddenly I realized something almost funny. Brenda Whitmore had built her entire power structure around controlling living grass. Grass height, grass color, water schedules, fertilizer treatments, lawn inspections. Everything depended on homeowners needing her approval to maintain appearances. But there was one thing she could not control: turf. The next morning, I drove 40 miles south to a commercial landscaping supplier outside Austin. The warehouse smelled like rubber backing, machine oil, and fresh-cut synthetic fiber. Giant rolls of artificial turf stood stacked upright, like green carpet cylinders 20 feet tall. A salesman named Rick walked me through different grades while forklifts beeped somewhere deeper inside the building. Sports turf, pet turf, residential luxury blends. Some of it looked fake enough to belong on a miniature golf course. But one product stopped me cold. Dense emerald fibers. Natural brown underlayer. Heat-resistant backing. From 6 feet away, it looked better than 90% of the lawns inside Willow Creek Estates. Popular with drought communities, Rick explained while running his hand across the surface. No watering. No fertilizers. No maintenance besides rinsing. No maintenance. No violations. No leverage. The price made me whistle quietly. $18,000 installed for my entire front lawn. Expensive, but lawsuits cost more. I stood there under fluorescent warehouse lights, staring at perfect artificial grass, while forklifts hummed nearby, and realized I had finally found the pressure point Brenda could not regulate away. On the drive home, hot wind rattled against my truck doors while county radio stations repeated water conservation warnings every 15 minutes. Mandatory reductions. Drought emergency conditions. Voluntary landscaping limitations. Meanwhile, Willow Creek continued spraying enough water nightly to refill a small lake. That evening, I pulled up the HOA bylaws at my kitchen table. 78 pages of suburban dictatorship disguised as community guidelines. Lawn appearance standards. Color consistency. Acceptable edging materials. Decorative shrub restrictions. But nowhere in the entire document did it prohibit synthetic turf installations. Not one sentence. I actually laughed out loud sitting there under the glow of my laptop screen while ice melted slowly in a glass beside me. Brenda had spent years obsessing over appearances without realizing she forgot to ban the one thing capable of breaking her entire enforcement system. 3 days later, installation crews arrived just after sunrise. The sound of sod cutters grinding through my old lawn echoed across the neighborhood before most people finished breakfast. Dirt and dry grass rolled up in long strips, while diesel engines idled at the curb. Curtains moved instantly across nearby windows. Brenda's golf cart appeared less than 20 minutes later. Of course it did. She stopped across the street wearing oversized sunglasses and holding a coffee tumbler with both hands like she was trying to process a crime scene. The installation foreman spread crushed granite base material, while another worker rolled out strips of emerald turf across my yard. Under direct sunlight, the surface looked almost unnaturally perfect. Every blade stood upright, every inch evenly green without a single brown patch anywhere. Neighbors slowly wandered outside pretending to check mailboxes while secretly staring at my front lawn transformation like they were watching somebody install alien technology. Brenda finally crossed the street near noon. Heat shimmered above the pavement, while the fresh synthetic turf radiated that faint rubber smell new athletic fields always have in August. She stopped at the edge of my driveway, staring silently at the lawn for several seconds before speaking. "This cannot possibly comply with community standards," she said quietly. I looked down at the flawless emerald surface stretching across my yard. "Funny thing about standards," I replied. "You should always read the fine print before enforcing them." For the first time since this whole war started, Brenda Whitmore looked uncertain. Brenda Whitmore lasted exactly 48 hours before she tried taking control back. That was the thing about people addicted to authority. Silence makes them panic. My new turf sat glowing emerald green under the Texas sun like a perfectly manicured movie set, while every other lawn in Willow Creek estates slowly browned under drought restrictions. No sprinklers, no fertilizer runoff, no landscapers. Just flawless green 24 hours a day without using a single gallon of water. The contrast drove Brenda insane. By Monday morning, neighbors had started slowing their cars near my driveway just to stare at it. Some even asked the installation crew for contractor information before they finished packing up equipment. That was the real problem for Brenda. Control spreads through fear, but rebellion spreads through curiosity. Around noon, my security cameras caught her walking across my lawn with a clipboard and metal measuring tape while I was inside working. The little notification alert flashed across my laptop screen while I reviewed irrigation reports at the kitchen table. Outside, cicadas buzzed loudly in the heat, and the faint smell of hot rubber drifted through the open window from the fresh turf backing. Brenda crouched near the edge of my lawn, poking at the seams with the end of her pen like she expected to uncover evidence of a federal conspiracy. Then she did something incredibly stupid. She pulled up one corner of the turf near the sidewalk, trying to inspect the underlayer. The camera audio picked up the tearing sound clearly. Sharp, quick, deliberate. I walked outside before she realized I was home. "Interesting inspection technique," I said calmly. Brenda spun around so fast her sunglasses nearly slipped off. For half a second, genuine panic crossed her face before the mask returned. "I am documenting unauthorized installation defects," she snapped. The afternoon heat radiated off the pavement in waves while nearby sprinklers hissed somewhere farther down the block. I looked down at the damaged turf corner curling slightly upward near her shoes. "You are standing on private property, damaging a legally permitted installation." Brenda crossed her arms immediately. "Synthetic landscaping violates neighborhood appearance standards." "Show me where," I replied. Silence. Tiny silence. Barely 2 seconds. But enough. Her jaw tightened. "The board is reviewing enforcement options." I almost smiled. Reviewing enforcement options meant they still had no rule against turf, which meant she was improvising now. Dangerous place for controlling people. "Good," I said, "because my attorney is reviewing harassment patterns." The air changed instantly. You could almost feel it. Brenda's posture stiffened while hot wind rattled decorative trees along the sidewalk. Most people threatened with lawyers become louder. Brenda became quieter. "You are overreacting," she said carefully. "This is about maintaining standards." "No," I answered. "This is about you trespassing on camera for the 3rd time in 2 months." Her knuckles tightened around the clipboard hard enough to whiten her fingers. Then she turned and walked away without another word. But here is the thing Brenda still did not understand. I was never trying to scare her. I was buying time. Because 2 days earlier, I had already forwarded 6 months of documentation to the County Drought Enforcement Office. Water usage reports, irrigation schedules, HOA financial records, video footage of runoff violations. Everything. And apparently somebody at the county took it seriously. Wednesday afternoon, 2 white county vehicles rolled slowly into Willow Creek Estates, while temperatures pushed past 104 degrees. The logos on the doors read Texas Water Conservation Enforcement Division. I watched from my garage while investigators photographed common area sprinklers spraying directly onto sidewalks under the blazing sun. One of them actually used a flow meter beside the main entrance fountain while Brenda stood nearby, talking so fast her words practically tangled together. Even from half a block away, I could hear the strain in her voice. The smell of overheated pavement and wet fertilizer drifted through the neighborhood while residents quietly gathered outside pretending not to watch. Then came the moment I will never forget. One investigator pointed directly toward my house, toward the artificial turf, toward the only perfectly green lawn in Willow Creek, not wasting water. Brenda followed his finger with a look on her face like somebody had just pulled the floor out from underneath her. The emergency HOA meeting started at 7 o'clock sharp on a Thursday night, but by 6:30 the parking lot outside the Willow Creek clubhouse was already overflowing. Pickup trucks lined the curb. Luxury SUVs packed every available space. Even people who normally ignored HOA meetings showed up after county investigators spent 2 straight days walking around the neighborhood with clipboards and cameras. The air outside smelled like overheated asphalt and fresh-cut grass, while cicadas screamed from the trees surrounding the clubhouse. Inside, the atmosphere felt completely different than usual. Tense. Heavy. Like everybody finally realized the rules only worked until somebody started asking real questions. Folding chairs scraped across tile floors while residents packed shoulder to shoulder beneath fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Brenda Whitmore stood near the front beside a projection screen wearing another spotless white outfit, but for the first time since I moved into Willow Creek, she looked tired. Not physically tired. Controlled personality tired. The kind that happens when somebody spends too much energy trying to hold collapsing systems together. Her smile flickered on and off every few seconds while board members whispered nervously around her. Then the meeting started, and everything unraveled faster than even I expected. One county investigator sat quietly near the back wall flipping through documents while residents immediately began asking questions about water violations. Real questions. Sharp questions. Why had the HOA ignored drought restrictions for over a year? Why were common area sprinklers running daily during emergency conservation notices? Why did landscaping contracts nearly triple over 2 summers? Brenda tried controlling the room at first. These matters are being reviewed. She repeated over and over while gripping the podium tightly enough to whiten her fingers. But then Mrs. Holloway from Cedar Lane stood up holding a printed invoice. Why are we paying $80,000 annually for lawn maintenance during a drought emergency? Silence hit the room like a power outage. You could hear air conditioning humming through the ceiling vents. Somebody dropped a pen near the back row. Brenda opened her mouth, closed it again, then blamed rising costs. Bad answer. Very bad answer. Because another resident immediately pulled up county records on his phone showing the landscaping company belonged to Brenda's brother-in-law. That was the moment the room changed completely. Voices started overlapping. Residents who stayed silent for years suddenly started talking all at once. Selective fines, favoritism, unauthorized fees, threats over landscaping compliance. Every buried frustration inside Willow Creek Estates finally surfaced under those fluorescent lights while Brenda stood trapped behind the podium, trying desperately to regain control. I stayed near the side wall, listening quietly while the smell of burnt coffee drifted from the refreshment table. Then one of the county investigators finally stood up. Calm guy, mid-50s, sunburned neck from years working outdoors. He adjusted his glasses and addressed the room without raising his voice once. Current evidence indicates this HOA exceeded county drought allocation limits by approximately 3.8 million gallons over 18 months. The entire room went silent again. 3.8 million gallons. Hearing the number out loud changed everything. Suddenly, this was not neighborhood drama anymore. It was public resource abuse during a statewide drought emergency. Brenda tried interrupting him twice before he calmly continued reading from his folder. Excessive irrigation, improper runoff management, unauthorized water schedule exemptions, potential misuse of HOA funds. Then came the part that almost made me laugh. The investigator pointed directly toward a photo projected on the screen behind Brenda. My lawn. Perfect emerald artificial turf glowing under bright Texas sunlight. This property, he said evenly, demonstrates compliant, drought-resistant landscaping alternatives that required zero excess water consumption. Every head in the room turned toward me at once. Brenda followed slowly, her expression frozen halfway between anger and disbelief. The irony hit so hard it almost felt unreal. The woman who spent months harassing me over grass color had accidentally turned my lawn into evidence against her entire operation. Then the final blow landed. A process server walked through the clubhouse doors carrying a thick envelope and handed it directly to Brenda Whitmore in front of everyone. Harassment complaint. Civil filing. Trespassing documentation attached. I still remember the exact sound the paper made when she opened it. Soft crackle under fluorescent lights while the entire room watched in silence. Brenda's face lost color one piece at a time. And for the first time since this whole mess began, nobody looked afraid of her anymore. 3 months later, Willow Creek Estates sounded completely different. No endless hiss of sprinklers before sunrise. No fertilizer trucks rumbling through the neighborhood every weekend. No golf cart patrols creeping past driveways at 6 in the morning looking for violations. Just wind moving through dry oak trees and the occasional bark of somebody's dog echoing down the cul-de-sac. Funny how peaceful a neighborhood becomes once fear leaves it. Summer still baked the streets hard enough to shimmer by noon, but the entire subdivision had changed. Half the residents converted to drought-resistant landscaping after county penalties hit the HOA budget. Decorative rock gardens replaced oversized lawns. Native plants appeared where thirsty grass used to dominate every yard. The neighborhood fountain near the entrance stopped running permanently after conservation enforcement fines nearly emptied the reserve account. Even the air smelled different now. Less chlorine, less fertilizer, more dust and cedar after sunset like Texas was supposed to smell in August. Brenda Whitmore resigned 2 weeks after the emergency meeting. Officially, the board announced it was for personal reasons. Nobody believed that for a second. The county investigation uncovered unauthorized landscaping contracts tied to her relatives, selective enforcement practices, and enough water misuse violations to trigger mandatory oversight for the entire HOA. Residents who spent years staying silent suddenly started talking openly once they realized her authority had always depended on intimidation more than actual rules. The civil harassment case settled quietly outside court. My attorney handled most of it while I kept working irrigation projects across Central Texas. Brenda paid damages for trespassing, false enforcement actions, and property interference connected to the turf incident. But honestly, the money mattered less than the silence afterward. That silence felt priceless. One evening near the end of September, I sat alone on my front porch watching sunset light reflect across the artificial turf stretching perfectly green beneath the fading sky. The surface still looked unreal sometimes. Too flawless. Too consistent. Kids riding bicycles through the neighborhood slowed down occasionally to touch it with their shoes because they could not believe it stayed green without sprinklers running every night. Across the street, old Mr. Donnelly replaced half his lawn with gravel and desert plants after seeing my setup survive the summer heat without wasting a drop of water. He waved at me while adjusting a new drip irrigation line one evening. "You started a revolution around here," he laughed. Maybe he was right. Maybe people just needed proof they were allowed to stop pretending all the time. The craziest part was how small the whole thing started. Grass color. That was it. One woman obsessed with appearances trying to control a neighborhood through cosmetic perfection. But systems built entirely around control always crack eventually because control requires constant pressure to survive. The second people stop fearing the pressure, everything underneath starts collapsing fast. I learned that standing in my driveway one cool October morning while county crews shut down the oversized sprinkler system near the Willow Creek entrance sign. Water sprayed weekly one final time before the pipes went silent. No dramatic moment. No cheering crowds. Just a metallic clunk from the valve system and sudden quiet settling across the neighborhood. Real quiet. The kind that feels strange after months of noise. I stood there with coffee in my hand, smelling cold morning air and dry grass, while sunlight rolled slowly across my lawn. Perfect emerald green, without a single sprinkler running anywhere nearby. That was the irony Brenda Whitmore never understood. She spent months demanding greener grass because she thought appearances created value. But real value comes from knowing when to stop wasting energy trying to impress people who confuse control with standards. In the end, she lost her position, the HOA lost thousands in penalties, and the neighborhood she tried so hard to control ended up following the example she spent months trying to punish. Sometimes justice is loud. Courtrooms. Headlines. Public humiliation. But sometimes justice sounds like sprinklers finally shutting off after years of running for no reason at all.